Clint Eastwood, dressed in a simple dark jacket and jeans, walked into the high-end restaurant in Los Angeles. It was one of those places where the elite gathered, where tables were booked months in advance, and where status meant everything. Eastwood didn't care for all that. He had come for one thing, a quiet meal. As he stepped inside, heads subtly turned, but no one recognized him. A group of young influencers sat in the corner, laughing over their latest brand deals. A businessman in a sharp suit sipped on a glass of expensive whiskey, glancing at his Rolex. The place screamed wealth and exclusivity. Clint walked up to the hostess stand, where a young woman barely in her 20s gave him a once-over. She didn't recognize him. Instead, she saw an old man in simple clothes. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone polite but dismissive. "No, but I was hoping to get a table," Clint said, his voice low and calm. The hostess forced a tight smile. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." Clint nodded, not one for causing a scene. "I see. No problem." But as he turned to leave, he overheard a whisper behind him, the hostess speaking to a waiter. "These rich old guys always try to walk in like they own the place. Probably doesn't even know how expensive it is." A slight smirk formed at the corner of Eastwood's lips. If only she knew. Clint turned back and made his way toward the bar instead. He figured he'd order a drink and quietly leave. As he sat down, a waiter approached, a young man with slicked back hair, a crisp black uniform, and an air of arrogance. "Sir, I'm afraid this section is reserved for VIPs only." Clint raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know a bar stool counted as VIP seating?" The waiter barely concealed his smirk. "We like to maintain a certain atmosphere here. If you'd like, there's a diner down the street that might be more suited to your taste." The insult was clear. A few patrons nearby chuckled, watching the interaction. Clint studied the waiter for a moment. He could have responded. He could have called them out. But he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, stood up, and prepared to leave. But just as he did, a familiar voice rang out from across the room. "Is that who I think it is?" The atmosphere shifted. The well-dressed man, his finely tailored suit reflecting the dim chandelier light, hurried across the restaurant floor. His polished shoes clicked sharply against the marble as he weaved through the maze of tables, his eyes locked onto the older man who had just been humiliated. As the restaurant owner closed the distance, his expression shifted from curiosity to complete shock. The hostess and the waiter, now realizing that something was very, very wrong, exchanged uneasy glances. The waiter, who had just moments ago dismissed Clint Eastwood like an irrelevant old man, gulped audibly. By the time the owner reached the group, his voice was almost breathless. "Mr. Eastwood," he exclaimed, his tone a mix of disbelief and respect. "What an incredible honor to have you here." The room seemed to freeze. The background noise of clinking glasses and soft jazz faded as heads turned toward the scene. At one table, an elegant woman with diamonds on her wrist whispered, "Did he just say Eastwood?" A young businessman sitting near the bar blinked in realization. "No way. That Clint Eastwood? The legend?" Even the influencers at the corner booth, previously glued to their phones, had put down their devices. The young hostess turned pale. The waiter stiffened, his posture changing from arrogance to discomfort. Clint Eastwood, still as cool and composed as ever, merely gave a small nod. "Didn't mean to cause a fuss. Just came in for a meal." But the owner wasn't about to let this go so easily. He turned sharply toward the hostess and the waiter, his expression darkening. "Are you telling me you turned away one of the greatest filmmakers of all time?" The hostess opened her mouth, but no words came out. The waiter fumbled. His previous smug demeanor had evaporated. I didn't know. I mean, I just thought—" "You just thought he wasn't worth your time?" The owner cut in, his voice like ice. The silence was deafening. At this point, even some of the guests at the restaurant were subtly recording the interaction on their phones. Clint, however, just smirked. "No harm done," he said. "But maybe next time, don't judge a man by his clothes." The owner, eager to make things right, gestured toward the grandest table in the entire restaurant, a private booth with velvet seating and a panoramic view of the city skyline. "Mr. Eastwood, please, allow me to personally seat you at our best table." The waiter, still frozen, finally mustered the courage to speak. "Sir, I truly didn't mean any disrespect. I had no idea." Clint looked at him for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he simply patted the young man on the shoulder. "Now you do." And with that, he walked toward his table. the owner trailing closely behind him. As Clint took his seat, the restaurant, once buzzing with chatter, had become a place of quiet reverence. But the night was far from over. Within minutes, the energy of the entire restaurant had shifted. The same waiter who had sneered at Clint was now standing upright, fully attentive, his hands slightly trembling as he held a notepad. The hostess, previously indifferent, had stationed herself near his table, ready to assist at a moment's notice. The head chef personally emerged from the kitchen, a rarity in this establishment. He was a renowned culinary artist, the kind of chef who usually never greeted guests unless they were royalty or Hollywood elite. But tonight, Clint Eastwood was more than just a guest. "Mr. Eastwood," the chef said, his thick French accent carrying over the hushed room, "it would be an honor to prepare something special for you. Whatever you wish." The guests who had previously ignored him were now stealing glances, whispering. Some looked ashamed, realizing they had just sat through a moment of profound irony. The influencers at the corner booth were now frantically Googling Clint Eastwood's name. One of them whispered, "Oh my God, he directed $1 Million Baby and Unforgiven. That guy is a legend." Even the businessman with the Rolex, who had barely looked up when Clint first walked in, now raised his glass in respect. Meanwhile, the young waiter who had earlier suggested Clint find a diner down the street stood quietly, awaiting his order. Clint, still calm as ever, looked up at him. "Just a steak, son." And maybe a little humility. The waiter swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Right away." And just like that, Clint had taught an entire room a lesson, without raising his voice, without demanding recognition. By the time Clint finished his meal, the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. The owner insisted that his meal was on the house, but Clint refused. Instead, he left a generous tip, along with a note on the check. The young hostess and waiter later unfolded it and read, "Respect isn't about who you think someone is. It's about who you are." The next day, the restaurant staff couldn't stop talking about what had happened. The young waiter, now humbled, kept the note as a reminder. Clint Eastwood, however, walked out just as quietly as he had entered. No grand exit, no speech, just a man who had proven that class wasn't about wealth or fame, but respect. And respect, unlike reservations, shouldn't be limited.